Good morning again. If we have not had a chance to meet, would love to do so. I will be out at the lobby. I have some Girl Scouts cookies for you. So if you're new, Ralph, if you are new, would love for you to stop by and just get connected a little bit. A couple things before I get started. This morning, I just want to take a moment just to celebrate some of the good things that are happening in our community. We just celebrated 2 baptisms this morning. Yeah, let's go ahead and give that applause. Actually, the same family will be doing a child dedication at the end of service as well. So please stick around for that. That would be wonderful to be a part of. The other thing I want to mention was like over across at PLU, I was invited to this thing. I'm going to mispronounce it, but it was put on by Nahoaloha of Hawaii. So like the Friends of Hawaii, they did like this luau event where a bunch of students put together this program where they were dancing and doing all these cultural performances, and it was a really great thing to be a part of. We had a student who actually comes to this church. Lucero was a part of that as well, and it was just wonderful to see. And of course, the shaved ice was a highlight as well. That was a great thing to be a part of. And so the reason why I want to start off with just highlighting a few things is just I think it's always important to remember in our communities that good things are happening, that God is working, that God works in families, God works through child dedication, God works through various cultures and the beauty that it brings. And we need these reminders, especially because we often are faced with a lot of not so good news as well. And it can be easy to only be situated in that. This morning, though, I do want to point out one thing that's happened locally in our community just because of how big it's gotten, and I'm talking about Foss High School. Many of you may be aware, just 15 minutes from our church at Foss High School, there was multiple stabbings. And there are 4 students currently in the hospital, 1 in the ICU, and this was done by another student that they knew. And a security officer was also injured in the process as well. And over these next few days, I guarantee you, as with most of these events go, you will have all the opinions and all the hot takes. But I just wanted to say, at the very least, a pastoral word on this is that it is just tragic all around, no matter how you parse out the details. It's tragic that you had 5 students in a physical altercation over what appears to be a vape pen. It's tragic that the student that did stab the other students has a history of being bullied, and he had to move from Clover Park High School to Foss in order to get away from that. It's tragic that we are talking about trying him as an adult and lacking an imagination for what does restorative justice looks like. There's a lot of ways that this is heartbreaking for us as a community. And I think that one of the things that I often come to when I see events like this is that it's really easy for us adults, and I include myself at the age of 33, it's really easy for us to see headlines like this and to think, number 1, this is really awful, and then number 2, what is wrong with kids these days? It's really easy to go the route of, oh, you see, it's the social media and it's the education system and X, Y, and Z, and just to say, oh, that's the problem out there. And I'm not saying there's no validity to those things, but one of the things I want to maybe suggest this morning is it's also good for us as adults to pause and to realize, in a lot of ways, what we see in the next generation is often just a mirroring of what they see in us adults. One of the things I want to suggest is what could lead to something tragic like that at Foss is that so often the next generation sees how adults are acting in their communities and in their world, and what they are seeing is the rise of the way that we have legitimized and validated hating one another and being angry with one another. There was a Pew research that was done recently where they interviewed 25 countries, people in those countries, and they asked a simple question of, do you think other citizens in your country are good, moral people? And of those 25 countries, there were 24 that answered in the positive, yes, I believe the best about other citizens in my country. And in Canada, I believe it was 92% or higher that people said, yes, I believe it. In the UK, it was over 80% who believed, yes, I believe it. Even in South Korea, it was over 70% that said, yes, I believe other citizens in my country are well-to-do people. 24 out of 25 overwhelmingly said yes in the positive. There was only one country that said no. The one exception was the United States, where 53% of people said they believe the worst about other people in their country. Hating one another, being angry with one another has become as American as hot dogs and baseball for us, it seems. And you can look all around you and you will see that that's the case. You can see it online. You can see it in your politics. You can see it in your news. You can see it in school board meetings. You can see it at the gym. You can see it even here at church. And as we just talked about, you can see it in the schools as well. And the problem is that when we begin to be angry with one another and when we allow hate to take over, there's this way in which it begins to dehumanize the person we are hating. And the more we dehumanize, the more we validate contempt. And the more we have contempt for one another, the more likely it is we can justify outbreaks of violence. Another way of saying this is I think hate corrodes who we are and prevents us from living our best lives. It's just not good for our country, but also I would add, hate is a practice, it's a habit that is not good for our souls, and it makes us less and less human. And I think this is the reason why when Jesus is teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, and this is like his best hits, these are the things he wants people to get, he spends a good amount of time talking about hate and anger. And what Jesus does is he links hate and anger to the sin of murder. And here's what he has to say on it. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. If you've never read this before, you might be surprised and stunned by Jesus' words. And if you have read it before, you should be stunned and surprised still by Jesus' words, because it's quite extreme. Jesus is saying that it's not just murder that will put you in trouble with the courts and put you in cosmic trouble in the eternal courts, but it's also the way that you lose control of your anger and the ways that you show contempt that will also put you in danger of the fires of hell. And when I read this, sometimes I feel like maybe Jesus is a little bit extreme on this. I can understand why if you murder someone, that's really bad. But it's hard for me to sometimes conceptualize why is Jesus so hard about the words we use and the feelings we have. What are words and feelings? You know, the whole saying of sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Why is Raka such a bad thing? And I think it's because Jesus brilliantly realizes that in order for something like murder to happen out here, it first has to take place in our imaginations and in our hearts. What Jesus is saying is that when we are angry with people, when we become hateful with people, when we start to use certain kinds of words and we start to raka them, what we are doing is we are murdering them in our hearts and in our imaginations. We are killing their dignity. And that is the first step towards killing them in reality. Jesus isn't just talking about the end result. Jesus is also talking about what is the source in the heart and in the imagination that leads to murder. And this is why Jesus points out that word, raka. He says this because calling someone raka back then would be like telling someone today, you are a person who has no value, no worth, you are empty, you are good for nothing. Now, I don't need to tell you what words are available today to communicate that. You can think of that all on your own. But this is the danger of communicating with people in this way. This is the danger of imagining people as raka. Let me just illustrate this. Like if I had someone who was hurtful to me, who was not treating me the right way. And I decided to spend every single day imagining that they are raka, that they are nothing, that they are useless, that they are devoid of good, that they are not created in the image of God. If I got into the habit of thinking that day after day after day, even though I never killed them, what would happen to me? What would happen is, like any other habit, it would just become natural for me to view this person as devoid of good, as worthless, as valueless, as not being made in the image of God. And if I keep believing that about that person, eventually at some point in my life, it's not going to be very hard for me to lie to that person. At some point in my life, it's not going to be very hard for me to slander them and say all these false things in public about that person and gossip about that person. And then at some point, it might even happen where I can benefit, but it might harm them indirectly and it won't bother me. You see how one thing after the next, it can escalate. And so what I'm trying to say here is that the danger of hate is that at minimum, it murders the image of God in another person. And as you commit the murder of your dignity again and again and again, what you are willing to do to a person escalates. And it gets us to a place where it completely dehumanizes them, and it also dehumanizes us as we participate in that kind of unbridled rage. So the question becomes, what is the better way to live our lives? What is the better way to pursue? And this is where Jesus says, there is a much better way to respond to the ways that people harm you and hurt you and hate you. And Jesus would say that way is the way of forgiveness. And Jesus doesn't just talk about forgiveness, by the way, but a couple weeks ago, we celebrated the fact on Good Friday that what? Jesus modeled forgiveness himself. He went to the cross on our behalf. And something you should always make note of every time we talk about the cross is that Jesus didn't do this because we had it figured out. Jesus didn't do this because we were good. Jesus didn't do this because we treated him right. But if we look at the letter to the Romans, this is what Paul says about what Jesus did on our behalf. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. That's us. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we were still sinners, while we were still enemies of God, while we were still broken, while we still didn't have it figured out, Jesus died for us. Sometimes I think as Christians, we fall into this trap or this cultural belief that the point of being Christian is to be good people. It's to be better people. It's to be nice people. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be good or better or nice, but I do want to challenge that notion and maybe even tell you to toss it out of the way you think about Christianity, because I don't believe the point of being Christian is to be a good person. And part of the problem with that definition is if we say being Christian is about being good, well, based on whose definition? Is it based on my definition? Is it based on your definition? The answer is yes. Right? It would be based on my definition or your definition. It'd be highly subjective. And the way we often try to define good is usually in ways that justify our own actions, but then take seriously the actions of other people. So I would toss out this idea that being Christian is about being good people. I would say that being Christian is about looking more like Jesus and acting like Jesus and defining good based on who Jesus is. And if that's the definition we want to follow for what it means to be a Christian, well then we have to actually do what Jesus did. We have to model his life. And so if Jesus is someone who is willing to forgive in ways that are just unthinkable and amazing and magnificent, we also have to become people who look like Jesus and learn to forgive. We need to be a forgiving people. If you've been coming to church for a while, or if you've heard these messages before, you might be thinking, wow, this is really Basic 101. Did you not study this week? Like, what? Why are you teaching about forgiveness? This seems old. This seems repetitive. We've heard it over and over again. Jesus forgave us. We should forgive other people. Why are we spending another 30 minutes on this? And I would just say it's the same reason why every time I go to the doctor, they say you need to run more. Every time I go to the dentist, they say you need to floss more. It's because we can say this over and over again, but it's very difficult to actually put it into practice. It's very difficult not to choose hate and rage and anger, but to choose mercy and grace and forgiveness. And I think there's two reasons really why we run into this. And I think the first roadblock I would say, is that we love our rights and we love what is fair. Especially here in the United States, there is a theme, there's an ethos, there's a spirit that we often communicate time and time again as Americans, right? We love to talk about rights. We love to talk about what is fair. And I want to be clear here before I get some angry emails. I love America. I love rights. I love what is fair. I am all about the Constitution, the First Amendment, all of that. That's not what I'm attacking. What I'm saying, though, is when you live in an atmosphere that's constantly talking about your rights and constantly talking about what is fair, it makes it really hard to think about forgiveness. Because you cannot make room for what is right and what is fair if you want to make space for forgiveness. It's almost counterintuitive to a lot of the things that we're hearing about rights and fairness. When it comes to forgiveness, you kind of have to ditch a little bit of both. And the case in point I would make for this is look at the life of Jesus. Think about Jesus' rights and what's fair to Jesus. If Jesus is who scriptures say he is, if Jesus is the one who was there at the beginning, he is God himself who created the universe and created the world and made all things good and beautiful and whole. And if scripture is true that we are who we are and we didn't really do well in Genesis chapter 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth, then what's right for Jesus is he doesn't necessarily have to do anything on our behalf. I know that's hard to hear, but that's kind of what scripture says, right? If Jesus is holy, just, and righteous, and he is whole without us, he doesn't have to do anything on our behalf. Good Friday did not need to happen. Easter did not have to happen. If Jesus held on to what was right for him, there does not need to be forgiveness, mercy, or grace. And if Jesus also held on to what was fair for him, it's certainly not fair that the one who is without sin would become sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. That doesn't make any sense. And yet, what do we celebrate week after week after week? We celebrate that Jesus let go of what was his right, and Jesus let go of what is fair in order to love us in the way we need to be loved. What Jesus teaches us about forgiveness is that it makes no claims to one's rights and it is always unfair. And here's the hard part. Until we can accept that, we will not forgive. We will not learn how to be people who show grace and mercy. So that's the first roadblock, is that often we are fixated on our rights and we are fixated on what is fair. But then even let's just say we get to a place where we're okay, we can't have fairness and we can't have what's right. The second roadblock we often run into is that we don't believe forgiveness is always realistic. We love the idea of Jesus forgiving. We love the idea. At some point, we get to a place where we love the idea of forgiving the people who we love and who love us back. But then we get to a place where we realize, but in real life, in the real world, with sin and destruction and hardship, it is so hard to take Jesus seriously. And maybe Jesus wasn't fully 100% serious about this way of grace and mercy and love. Maybe the way of Jesus is just not realistic at all. I was reading the news a couple weeks ago, and there was a quote that stood out to me that I want to share because I think it really captures what I'm trying to say here. Netanyahu said this one time. He said, "History proves, unfortunately and unhappily, Jesus Christ has no advantage over Genghis Khan." In other words, sometimes in reality, the enemy becomes too great, too powerful, too all-consuming that we can't follow the way of Jesus. That's just not realistic. Now, I had someone in the lobby tell me after I mentioned this, like, well, what about just war? And are you saying you're anti-military? Are you saying you're anti-violence? Are you saying that there is no such thing as the state and the ways they can operate? I'm not saying any of that at all. But here is what I'm saying, is that I think oftentimes as Christians, we often resort to that sort of thinking right there. We often resort quickly to this sort of thinking that says, oh, Jesus had some good ideas, but this situation right here is just too much. There's no way we can follow Jesus in this. It's just not realistic. Because if we were to follow Jesus, that's dangerous territory we're walking into. Because if I'm going to forgive and it doesn't matter what the other person will do, then that might come at the risk of my life. And if you feel that way, my answer to you this morning would be, you're exactly right. I mean, think about Jesus. Think about what he did and the grace and mercy he showed. How did people respond? They crucified him. That was what happened to Jesus. There is no guarantee that if we practice forgiveness like Jesus, people are going to treat us the way we should be treated. In fact, people might not treat us the way we should be treated. So then this morning you're thinking, that's a raw deal. Why would I ever forgive? And the answer for that is that we forgive because that is the only realistic way to free us from our captivity to hate. Forgiveness is not about them out there. Forgiveness is about you first and foremost. It's about, what do you want to be held captive to? Do you want to be held captive to your rage? Do you want to be held captive to your anger? Do you want to be shaped by the ways that other people mistreat you? Do you want your capacity to love to be dictated by what other people do to you? And do you want to seek retaliation in the name of what you believe to be right, what you deem to be fair, and what you deem to be realistic? Those are the questions we need to be asking ourselves, because forgiveness is about releasing our rights and our desire to get even, to retaliate, to get vengeance. And what we need to question is that what we really want for ourselves? Because what Jesus warns us is that will dehumanize us. That will make us less human. That will take us away from becoming more like him. Now, I can't decide for you if you want to try forgiveness or not in your life. But I do have a story this morning of maybe one of the possibilities that forgiveness can lead to when we practice it in ways that are just unrealistic and unimaginable. Back in the 1990s, there was a guy by the name of Stephen, and he had a neighbor named Matthias, and they both lived in the country of Rwanda. And Stephen was a Tutsi, and Matthias was a Hutu, and they were good friends, and they always did things together, and they helped one another, and things were very peaceable and good until, if you know anything about the 90s, what happened was there was the Rwandan genocide. And when that happened, the Tutsi minorities were persecuted by the Hutus, and it became so widespread that during the Rwandan genocide, over 800,000 people were killed in just 100 days. And in the midst of all of that chaos, Matthias decided to murder Stephen's wife and his child. And Stephen was able to escape, and he was able to go away with his son. And years later, he was interviewed about this moment. And this is what he had to say to Christianity Today, who wrote this article. This is what Stephen said. He said, "I was full of hate. I didn't want to see or hear people like Matthias. So much pain. In Rwandan culture, men are not supposed to cry. I had my life and my little son. I was lucky, but I had lost everything else." I mean, who could blame him for feeling this way? Full of hate, full of rage. I could not imagine what I would be doing in his situation if I experienced the losses that he experienced, if I experienced the betrayal of my own neighbor doing that to my family. But then as you read this interview, Stephen talks about how after this, he encountered Jesus Christ in a real and powerful way. And as he learned more about who Jesus was, and as he started following Jesus, he realized, oh, wait a minute, Jesus was really serious about this forgiveness thing. And in fact, Jesus laid down his life for me when I didn't deserve it. And slowly but surely, he felt like Jesus was leading him to extend mercy and grace to his former neighbor. And he tried to resist it for as long as he could. Until one day, Stephen realized, okay, I can't keep resisting Jesus anymore. So he decided to go visit a prison after the genocide ended. And in that prison was Matthias. And he went up to Matthias and he told him that Jesus has forgiven me. So now I'm going to extend that grace and mercy to you. And I'm not going to seek to get even. I'm not going to seek vengeance. I'm not going to try to take you out in prison. I won't even try to take you out after you leave prison. All I want for you is for you to know who Jesus is, that he might heal the hate in you, that he might heal the brokenness in you, and that you might be a new creation. And Matthias thought, there is no way Stephen is real about this. And so he kind of kept his guard up. But Stephen kept visiting Matthias in the prison over and over again. And then 10 years later, when Matthias was finally released, they became best friends. And now, today, in Rwanda, they continue to go to church and community to community to talk about the power of the gospel and the power of forgiveness and how it made enemies into friends who talk about what it looks like to pursue forgiveness in even the most unrealistic situations. It's a beautiful story, and if you want to read more about it, please go on Christianity Today. Unless you don't have a subscription, then I'll give you the article. But here's the point I want to make. Sometimes I think it gets dangerous when we share stories like this, because what I don't want to communicate is this will automatically happen in your life if you pursue forgiveness and reconciliation. That's not the case. The point of the story is not that forgiveness always guarantees miracles like this, but what I do want to say is it certainly has a better chance than hate to create them. So this morning, the thing I want to ask you to trial run in your life is to trial run the way of Jesus and to trial run the way of forgiveness. And if you're wondering, well, what does that look like and how do I go about that? Here's just 4 simple steps to think about. First of all, number 1, start with you. If you are a non-Christian, then you don't actually need to be a believer to understand this concept of doing unto others what you would wish them to do unto you. Right? It's this idea, it's this golden rule of like, in life, we all mess up. And if you haven't messed up yet, you will mess up. And so when you mess up miserably and you hurt the people in your life, and there are reasons for people to be angry with you, think about, how do I want people to treat me in that moment? And then let that be the foundation from which you begin to extend grace to other people. And if you are a Christian, it's even better, because guess what? You already have the perfect model of someone who treated you well when you were broken. And we point to Jesus time and time again, and we say, he stepped in and he forgave and he showed us unimaginable love when we didn't deserve it. As Christians, we need to use that as our foundation, and from that begin to extend grace and mercy. Second thing is we have to give up what is right and fair. And what I mean by that is we need to give up our right to get even, and we need to get rid of our sense that things need to be fair. You might get an apology. Sometimes you might not get an apology. You might extend mercy and forgiveness, and that person just tosses it away. The outcome is not guaranteed, but what we need to be is we need to be people who are willing to say, okay, yeah, it might not be right, it might not be fair, but we're willing to model the way of Jesus anyways. Now, here's the third thing that's really important I don't want you to ignore, is don't ignore justice. Because oftentimes when I teach on forgiveness, people will come up to me and ask, well, does this mean it's okay for people to be abused? Is it okay for people to commit crimes to people? Should I just forgive that person? Is there no accountability? Is there no penalties? Are there no punishments? And I would say absolutely not. Sometimes there needs to be boundaries, even if there is forgiveness. Sometimes there needs to be consequences, even if there is forgiveness. The forgiveness of Jesus is not a license for people to abuse and get away with whatever they want to. Right? There's a theologian by the name of Amy Orr that said this. I want to kind of say what she had to say. Or Ewing. This is what she says. The gospel doesn't ask us to ignore the wrong or pretend it didn't happen. Instead, it offers us something astonishing, the chance to be free. Forgiveness is not about letting someone off the hook. It's about releasing ourselves from being chained to their actions. It's choosing to step into the freedom that Jesus has given us. It's not about ignoring justice. It's about how do we release ourselves from the captivity of our resentment and anger. So, which is the last point, by the way, if we go there. It's not about them. It's about you. It's about who are you becoming. It's about who am I allowing myself to be lorded by? Do I want to be lorded by my own emotions? Do I want to be lorded by the hate and the resentment that is building in me? Or do I want to allow Jesus to be Lord over my life and to shape me into a person who shows grace and mercy in the way that he shows it to us? So we're going to wrap up by heading into a time of communion where we take the bread and we take the cup, and this is a way of us celebrating, hey, God has forgiven us and shown us love. But before we do that, just want to change things up a little bit. If you go back to the teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks a bit about what to do when you worship. And he says that if you go to the temple in Jerusalem and you are there to worship and to make sacrifices, and you realize you have something against your brother or sister, then I want you to go back before you worship or before you sacrifice. Make things right, or at least extend forgiveness, and then return to the temple and worship and sacrifice. And something that gets missed in the text is when Jesus talks about the temple, he's talking about Jerusalem. And where Jesus is giving the sermon, he's in Galilee. And if you know your distances, the distance from Jerusalem to Galilee is about 70 miles with no cars. So what Jesus is saying is, if you traveled and walked all the way to Jerusalem 70 miles, and you realize right before you're about to enter the temple and you're about to worship, you've done something or someone has done something to you and it is unresolved and you have hate and hurt and anger in your heart and bitterness, then you need to go back 70 miles. And you need to figure out how to make things right. Now, I'm not suggesting you all go in your cars before you go to communion. But here is what I'm suggesting, that I think Jesus wants us to take him seriously there. That before we receive the forgiveness of God, before we celebrate the forgiveness of God, we ought to at least give it a try to forgive the people in our lives. The people that hurt us, the people that harm us, the people we are inclined to make rakas. And so this morning, I want to encourage you to maybe take a moment to think about who are the people in my life I need to let go of my rights to get vengeance on. Who are the people in my life I need to extend the mercy and love and Jesus toward? And here's the key thing that Amy or Ewing also said, that if your feelings aren't there yet, that's okay. Forgiveness is not contingent about feelings. Forgiveness is contingent upon obedience. And as we forgive, there might be a gap between the forgiveness that we have to offer and the complete forgiveness that Jesus gives. But guess what? Jesus will step in that gap. So if you feel like I can only forgive this much, then this morning the invitation is forgive as much as you can out of obedience and then ask Jesus to step in the rest of the way. Because the cross is enough to cover the gap between you and being able to forgive that other person. So before we come to the tables, take a moment, pause, think of who it is that you need to extend forgiveness to, and then I welcome you to receive the forgiveness of Jesus, and then to go out and to live a life of reconciliation. Would you join me in prayer as we head into that time? Jesus, I thank you for your gracious love, that you chose to abandon your rights. You chose to abandon what is fair. You chose to abandon what we often deem unrealistic, to show us your good way, to lay down your life on behalf of us, often broken, misguided sinners. It's because of that we have life with you. It's because of that we know joy and peace. It's because of that we can have eternal life. Because of that, we can look at this world full of hate, full of resentment, full of bitterness, and we can live with hope knowing that you are going to be making all things new, and you call us to participate in the newness that you are giving birth to. Which means we need to be people of forgiveness. We need to be people of reconciliation. And that's not always easy. So Jesus, I would ask this morning, as we come to the table to celebrate your great forgiveness for us, would we allow our hearts and our minds to begin to think of what would it look like to forgive the people in our lives and in our world who harm us, who make us afraid, who have done unthinkable and unimaginable things. God, I ask that as we participate in this, you would remind us that this is not so much about feeling a certain way, but it's about obedience to you. This is not about abandoning justice, but it's about freeing ourselves from the ways that this world is so captive to anger. God, help us to be a different kind of people, because the world desperately needs different kind of people. And so we celebrate the broken bread and we celebrate the cup. And as we take the bread and cup, may we also embody the same forgiveness for the world that you have created. We pray this all in your name, Jesus. And all God's people said, amen.